LeBron James was about to do something that would change someone's life forever, but no one expected it to happen like that. The restaurant was full that night. The clinking of cutlery against plates mingled with the buzz of lively conversation as waiters ran from side to side, balancing heavy trays. Among them, Emily moved quickly, her uniform impeccable and the professional smile she wore as a shield. She already knew that type of environment. Demanding customers, hurried orders, some generous tips and others almost non-existent. But that night, something bothered her. A table in the corner caught his attention. 4 well-dressed men were laughing among themselves, talking loudly and looking directly at her. The way they exchanged glances and condescending smiles made it clear they were talking about her. Taking a deep breath, Emily approached. "Good evening, gentlemen. Can I take the order?" One of the men, in a dark suit and expensive watch, leaned forward with a cynical smile. "Of course, darling. But first, answer me one thing." He paused dramatically. "Have you always dreamed of waiting tables?" The others laughed. Emily maintained her posture. "I had already been through situations. It was a busy night at a fancy restaurant in the city center. Among the elegant and noisy customers, a waitress named Emily ran back and forth, trying to serve everyone with the same professional smile as always. The restaurant was always crowded at that time. Men in suits discussed business between sips of expensive wine. Couples celebrated birthdays with exquisite dishes, and friends toasted some recent achievement. For Emily, this was just another day at work. Another long night in which I would have to ignore my tiredness, my sore feet, and sometimes even the lack of respect from some customers. She was already used to it. He had been working there for just over a year since moving to the city. The salary wasn't the best, but the tips helped pay the rent for the small apartment where she lived alone. It was a job that required patience and endurance, but Emily always took pride in doing her job well. That night, however, there was something different in the air, a strange feeling, as if something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Emily tried to ignore the feeling and continued her routine. Balancing the tray expertly, she deftly dodged other waiters, delivered orders without error, and maintained her smile, even when fatigue began to weigh heavily on her shoulders. It was then that he heard his first laugh. He looked to the side and saw a group of 4 men at a table in the corner. They were well-dressed, looked confident, and seemed to be having a lot of fun. But it wasn't just any fun. Something about the way they laughed, the way they looked at her, sent a shiver down her spine. He took a deep breath and headed towards the table, carrying his notebook and trying to ignore the feeling that something was about to go wrong. She didn't know it, but the night that seemed like any other was about to turn into a moment she would never forget. Emily maintained her posture as she approached the table. The professional smile was still there, but something inside her already knew what was coming. She recognized that type of customer, the condescending look, the tone of voice full of superiority, the muffled laughter whenever she walked away. I had dealt with this before, but that night it felt worse. "Good evening, gentlemen. Have you already decided what you are going to order?" The man sitting at the end of the table slowly looked up. His smile was wide, but there was something about it that made Emily want to pull away. "Hey, girl." He leaned his body forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Can you at least pretend to like your job?" The laughs came immediately, fast, intense. A wave of mockery crossed the table and landed directly on Emily. She took a deep breath. I had heard worse things. I had already dealt with rude, arrogant, impatient customers. It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to diminish her, and it probably wouldn't be the last. "So, what would you like to order?" he asked again, keeping his voice steady. Another man, with well-combed hair and an impeccable suit, shook his head with a sneer. "That's what happens when you don't study. You end up cleaning tables for the rest of your life." This time the laughter was louder. Emily felt her face heat up. The uniform seemed tighter, suffocating. She wanted to get out of there. She wanted to disappear, but she couldn't. She had no choice. So he swallowed his pride, took a deep breath, and did exactly what he learned to do throughout his life. He pretended that nothing had happened. "I'll be back when you're ready." He turned quickly and walked away without looking back. Laughter continued to ring in her ears as she walked to the counter, trying to keep her head up. On the other side of the restaurant, sitting discreetly at a table near the window, LeBron James watched everything. He saw the way Emily was treated. He saw the discomfort on her face, the way her expression changed for a brief moment before she regained her composure and continued forward. And that bothered him. LeBron knew that look. I knew that pain. He had already been in situations where he was underestimated, disrespected, treated as if his value was lower than that of others around him. But he also knew one thing. That night wasn't over yet. LeBron James remained where he was, watching the scene unfold before his eyes. The restaurant continued its normal rhythm, waiters taking orders, customers chatting animatedly, the clatter of cutlery echoing around the room. But to him, everything seemed to have slowed down. His attention was fixed on the waitress who, moments before, had been humiliated for no reason at all. Emily was now behind the counter, organizing orders, pretending nothing had happened. But LeBron recognized the way she pressed her lips together, the way she kept her hands busy, avoiding any eye contact. He knew that behavior. I had seen it so many times on other faces. I had felt it on my own skin, the feeling of being diminished, of being treated as less. He knew this story because, in a way, it had already been his. Since he was a child, he faced looks that said he couldn't do it. He grew up hearing predictions of failure, whispers of disdain, and comments that his destiny was already sealed, as if he had no choice but to accept it. But he never accepted. He fought against it and proved that other people's expectations would not define his future. Now I saw Emily facing the same kind of judgment, but without the same chance for an answer. She couldn't argue. He couldn't stand up to those men because he needed that job. So I did what so many people do in situations like this. I swallowed the humiliation and moved on. But not that time. LeBron knew that in his position he could simply ignore this. Continue your meal, leave the restaurant without interfering. But that was never his way of seeing the world. He didn't get up immediately. He didn't draw attention to himself. I wanted to do something different, something no one would ever forget. The night continued, and the humiliation gave no respite. Emily did her best to avoid the table of men who from the beginning seemed to be having fun at her expense. Every time he passed by, he could feel the gazes weighing on his back. She heard muffled whispers, contained laughter, loose sentences that seemed to be said on purpose for her to hear. "Has she realized that no one cares about her?" one of them murmured, and the answer came in the form of a low, condescending laugh. Emily took a deep breath, gripping the tray tighter than necessary. Her instinct told her to confront them, to say something, but reason reminded her of what was at stake. She couldn't. I couldn't lose that job. I couldn't ruin everything because of a few words. The truth, however, was that words hurt. She felt the weight of those sentences, the way each comment seemed to erode her confidence, a little at a time. Pretending he didn't hear was the only thing he could do, but even so, the lump in his throat only grew. And while Emily tried to hide her pain, LeBron James watched. He saw every detail, the way she forced a smile when serving other tables, how she avoided looking directly at those men, how her hands shook slightly when holding the pen to write down orders. This needed to stop. Discreetly, LeBron raised his hand and called the manager. The man, busy checking the services, quickly approached when he recognized who the customer was calling him. "How can I help you, sir?" he asked with a respectful tone. LeBron leaned over slightly and said something in a low voice. The manager froze for a moment. His eyes widened slightly, but he soon composed himself. "Absolutely," he said, nodding his head. "I'll solve this right now." And then he walked away. Seconds later, something happened that made the entire restaurant go silent. Silence fell over the restaurant like an unexpected wave. The group of men mocking Emily stopped laughing as soon as the waiter placed the check on the table. The leader of the group, still with a mocking smile, took the paper without haste, certain that this would be just another expensive dinner that he would pay for without thinking twice. But when he opened the receipt, his eyebrows furrowed. His eyes ran over the printed lines, and suddenly the smile disappeared. "What the hell is that?" he asked, his voice full of confusion and irritation. The other men leaned over to look at the paper, and one by one, their faces changed as well. It wasn't the amount of the bill that surprised them, but the message that had been written below. "That bill has already been paid," and a warning. "Respect never goes out of style." The silence that was previously just at the table spread throughout the entire restaurant. The other customers began to notice that something was happening, and within seconds, everyone was paying attention. The group looked around, searching for answers. Who had done this? Why would anyone bother paying that bill? It was then that a chair slid gently across the floor. LeBron James stood up. Recognition came instantly. The men's eyes widened when they saw who was there, walking towards the waitress they had ridiculed all night. But he didn't look at them. He didn't even say a word to the group. His eyes were on Emily. She stood still as he approached. He felt the attention of the entire restaurant on him, but at that moment everything seemed to disappear. All that existed was that tall man, giant in his presence, standing in front of him with a firm and at the same time gentle gaze. "You deserve much more than that," he said, his voice calm but full of meaning. "Never let these words define your worth." Emily blinked rapidly, feeling her vision blur. "I didn't want to cry. Not there, not like that." But something inside her broke when she heard those words. Someone finally saw it. Someone finally cared. And he didn't stop there. Emily blinked a few times, trying to understand what was happening. She could still feel the weight of LeBron James' words echoing inside her. But before she could react, the restaurant manager approached her and handed her a small envelope. She looked at him, confused. Is this for me?" His voice was low, almost trembling. The manager just nodded, smiling discreetly. With hesitant fingers, Emily opened the envelope and pulled out what was inside. For a moment, his brain refused to process what he saw. His eyes ran across the paper once, twice, 3 times, before his mouth fell open in shock. Inside the envelope was a check, but not an ordinary check. The amount was so high that Emily had to hold the paper with both hands to make sure she wasn't imagining it. The entire restaurant remained silent as her expression turned from incredulity to pure excitement. The men who had mocked her, who had laughed and treated her as if she were insignificant, were now mute. None of them dared to say a word. LeBron James ignored them. His attention was solely focused on Emily. "This isn't just because of what you went through here today," he said, his voice full of firmness and kindness. "This is for what you can do from now on." Emily felt the tears build up, but this time she didn't try to hold them back. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the check in his hands. It was about what it meant. For so long she was told it wasn't enough, that his value was measured by the uniform he wore, the work he did, the position he held. But at that moment someone looked at her and saw something different. She wasn't just a waitress. She was someone who deserved respect, someone who deserved opportunities. LeBron James didn't need to do that. She didn't need to pay the bill for the men who humiliated her. She didn't need to leave such a big tip. She didn't need to say anything. But he did. Because for him, true success wasn't just about statistics, numbers, or victories on the court. It was about what we achieved in life. The restaurant was still silent. Emily continued to hold the check with shaking hands, unable to look away from the amount written on it. But more than the numbers, what made her shudder was the message behind that gesture. LeBron James's words echoed in his mind, dispelling, little by little, all the doubts that had weighed on his shoulders for so long. She remembered all the times she was told she would never be anything more than a waitress. From the cutting words of customers who treated her as invisible, the looks of contempt, the muffled laughter. But now, there, in front of everyone, someone proved the opposite. It wasn't about the money, nor the fame of whoever was in front of her. It was a greater principle, something that transcends any material value. The group that humiliated her that night remained silent, unable to react. Once so full of confidence, they now seemed dwarfed by the grandeur of what had just happened. LeBron James looked at Emily one last time and smiled. There was no arrogance in his gesture, no need for recognition. He knew it wasn't about him, it was about her. About every person who has ever felt inferior, about every voice that has ever been silenced. Sometimes all it takes is a single attitude to transform a story, not for the money, but for the impact it can cause. And if this story touched you, remember, never allow others to define your worth. Just like Emily, you are so much more than the words of those who try to diminish you. I know this story touched your heart. Leave a comment telling us what impacted you most. Your opinion matters and can inspire others to see the true value of respect and empathy. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Small gestures can transform lives, and you could be the reason someone sees hope where there was only darkness before. And for more exciting stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Stories of overcoming, generosity, and humanity deserve to be told and shared. Let's spread messages that make a difference together.